Let's dig a little bit deeper. And we are now joined to talk about China's economy by Einar Tangen, a political and economic affairs commentator. Einar, always a pleasure to see you, my friend. I look forward to chatting with you about this. A lot going on in China right now. Now, we know that China's factory activity dipped, but it could have been a lot worse. Manufacturing showed some signs of life as the COVID-19 curves eased. And give us the good, the bad, and the ugly regarding the PMI numbers.
Well, it signifies a very nice shift. It's going in the right direction. The question is, in the months to come, you have to choose an alphabet letter, Sean. Is it going to be a V? Is it going to be a W? Is it going to be a K? Or is it going to be the dreaded L? And these are the kind of recovery forms that are out there. But it seems like there's poised to be a lot of revenge spending. People want to get out. You can see Meituan. You look at the bicycle routes that are being used. You see people really going around the city, experiencing it after a long 60 days of hiatus.
Yeah, that had to be tough. And you actually saw people basically running into the streets when they had the chance. Now, I guess the really good news for China is the severe lockdown in Shanghai is over. But it's going to take time for that all-important city to bounce back. What are you looking for? What will be the signs you're looking for?
Well, really, I mean, it's already seen part of that, and that is this 50-point plan. I mean, if you go back 7 days ago, there's a huge national meeting, 100,000 officials were called together at one conference, and they were told, the economy is job one. And then shortly after that, you had Shanghai put out all of these benefits. You were covering it earlier in terms of rent abatement, but they're really trying to make sure that these small, medium-sized enterprises, which are the backbone of China's economy, 90% of new jobs, 80% of existing jobs, that these do not go away. So they're making a lot of efforts. The question is, how will that rebound? And it's a lot going to be connected to how much consumption there's going to be. Remember, China's dual circulation economy depends on a strong internal consumption that kind of buoys the existing manufacturing and then attracts some outside investment.
Now, the government, as we have been talking about, has made some significant promises to ease the economic suffering. And as you mentioned, a lot of that is for small businesses. Now, how is manufacturing going to be affected by Beijing's effort to breathe life into the manufacturing sector?
Well, you can only do so much. I mean, they're obviously giving some incentives to keep employees on. They're cutting a lot of fees, delaying tax payments, etc. But in the end, it's demand, and that's the real question here. Now, right now, if you start looking around the globe, there's a lot of pent-up demand. Some of it due to logistics, some due to the situation in Ukraine, and some of it due to COVID. COVID is now, for the time being, is over. So the question is how much of an effect that is going to have. The logistics jams are still going to be there, obviously, and obviously the situation in Ukraine continues. But, if you start looking at China versus what's happening in the U.S., I mean, consumer sentiment is at an all-time low. But, the government is kind of mired in what they're going to do about it. There's lots of debates. There's going to have to be bills through Congress. The speed at which the government can react is very, very slow compared to China, which is really kind of jumped out of starting blocks and is already beginning its plan. Now, as I said, in the end, it's not the government that determines how much you spend, it's you.
I always enjoy chatting with you because you have all this experience and can really look at things from a global perspective. Now, we know growth projections for this year in China are smaller, especially compared to the years past. But I read an article before I came out here tonight that detailed how really the global interest to rally behind economic growth in China. A lot of people in the West and the U.S. are kind of cheering, let's hope China does go through a bad string. Does that make any sense to you?
Well, I mean, a lot of that is mired in this kind of emotional competition that has been created by the government policies and also, to a certain extent, fanned in the press globally. That somehow China's rise is everyone else's deficit. This is kind of zero-sum game plan. But one of the things that really struck me, Sean, is this. I was noticing the banks have actually upgraded ASEAN's growth almost by a full point. And when you start looking at something like that and understand that ASEAN is now China's major trade partner, and that is growing, you start to see some daylight for China, and it's moving away from the traditional centers. And I'm not leaving it behind. Europe and America are always going to be important markets, but you're starting to see a more balanced approach in China, and that augurs very well for the future of the Chinese economy.
You know, Einar, much of the economic blame on manufacturing right now is tied to the pandemic, but as you mentioned, clearly outside stresses, especially the conflict in Ukraine. What are you looking for there? Because no financial market likes to be surprised, and that area has perhaps the greatest potential to offer a surprise that could have rippling effects across the world.
Yeah, I mean, right now it's all negative, and there does not appear to be any kind of major breakthroughs. We discussed in the past the fact that Russia wants to get its ground game going, and they want territorial gains. It's being resisted. More arms and money is being poured into Ukraine, almost getting towards that 50 billion mark, unfortunately, and that's from the U.S. alone. And they couldn't find 50 billion to inoculate the world, but they can find it for a war. This is a kind of skewed priority. So right now, I don't think that people should be looking to Ukraine. They should be looking at what Ukraine is doing to the rest of the world in terms of food shortages, energy shortage, logistical log jams, and trying to figure out how to get around those. The food question is most pressing because you just take a major chunk out of the world's food production, and you have things in the United States. Some of the grain areas have been hard hit by a very dry winter that followed by a very rainy spring that really hit the winter wheat harvest. So, there's a lot of signs out there that it's going to be very difficult. Obviously, India is going, through a really scorching weather, and these are pointing. So right now, it's time to think about basics and not about luxury.
Yeah, and also worried about those countries that are indeed limiting exports right now. But we'll talk about that another time. Einar Tangen, always a pleasure, my friend. Political and economic affairs commentator.